So in in Pali, which is the language, the early language that's favored by the traditional Theravadans, believing it's the language the Buddha was using, there's a term called sati. And sati has historically been translated as mindfulness. And so that's led to the evolution of the mindfulness movement, we could call it mindfulness meditation, both in Asia and the West. And this is a meditation, like the meditation you would do at the different centers, IMS, Spirit Rock, or Gaia House. It's a meditation that wasn't practiced in the Buddha's day. There was a teacher, Mahasi Sayadaw, primarily, who took one aspect of the Four Elements practice, which was pushing. It's in the wind element, and made that the focus of meditation. He found that folks could maintain awareness in their abdomen, their belly, or their chest, and could fairly easily make and stay in contact with the breath in the body. And this evolved into the mindfulness or the insight practice that we know well in the West in particular. But in later years, recently, scholars have begun to realize that the word sati translates both as mindfulness and also as awareness. So that changes things quite a bit from my perspective, where we're talking about the use of awareness rather than a mindfulness. And mindfulness, I don't use the term much because it's so used now, it's lost some of its precision. But in this practice, we're talking about applying awareness to the breath, contacting, making a connection between awareness and the breath, where at first there's going to be a certain amount of doing. This is the first jhana factor of Vitakka. This is applied awareness. We're bringing awareness to the breath again and again. Every time we find our awareness is off the breath, we bring it back. And it's not going to help at all if you're critical, if you're judgmental, if you're scolding. It doesn't help because that gets into psychological defensiveness, and it can invite the superego to then get into guilt and shame. And so we've derailed our practice by punishing ourselves. So that's why we have to learn to come back with an ease, with a forgiveness, with a softness, and just settle back into the breath. On one retreat I was teaching, I used the phrase that I had come back to the breath 1,000,000 times in the 2-month retreat I did with my teacher. And I had some engineer come in to interview, done the math, saying it was impossible for me to come back to the breath 1,000,000 times in 2 months. I would have had to come back every 7 seconds or something. And I told him, no, this was a figure of speech. I didn't actually count. But the point is, you have to be prepared to come back 1,000,000 times. And you have to try to come back as softly as you can so you can simply engage the breath again without getting into any of the overlays of judgment or guilt or any of that, because none of that helps. And so we want to keep bringing awareness to the breath. That's our job here. That's all we have to do. I've mentioned that there are sort of a couple secrets of this practice. One of them is continuity. Continuity means staying with the breath from the moment you get up to the moment you go to sleep. It doesn't mean that we have the depth of contact we have when we're meditating. It's much lighter. It's a lower percentage of contact. But maintaining contact, even at a low percentage, keeps us connected to the breath. So when we do come to the meditation, it's easier to drop in and go deeper fairly quickly. The other big secret is silence. When we're on retreat doing this practice, we must cultivate inner and outer silence. Everybody cultivates outer silence, so there's not talking on a retreat except for when you're in an interview or asking a question in a Dharma talk. But it's where we have to pay attention to reducing the inner talk, our self-talk. We have to turn away from that. We have to not engage in it. We have to not be fascinated by our own inner dialogue and commentary. And that's hard to learn, but it's essential that we do it. So I have 8 actions that can support this practice. I'll start by just listing the 8, then I'll talk about each. The first is beginner's mind. Second, continuity that I just mentioned. Third, silence, I just mentioned. Natural breathing is 4th. Timing is 5th. Rigor is 6th. Generosity is 7th. And including your heart is 8. So the first is beginner's mind. We all have a certain amount of experience. There are some meditations that are easier for you and others are more challenging. So often what people will do is they will engage the meditation that they're good at. They will get deep with that meditation, and then they will try to apply that depth to the anapanasati, the breath awareness meditation. Unfortunately, it doesn't help. We have to stay with the immediacy of being with the breath in this moment. Some of you have learned other jhana techniques. There's now many teachers of jhana, many approaches, many conflicting approaches to jhana, disagreement among the teachers about what is jhana. And so we have to simply put down all of that. Anything that we think we know, any conceptual framework we're using, we have to really be just innocent, naive, and just be with the breath, with a openness, with no guile, no experience. Be willing to be in that beginner's mind where every possibility is available. The second action that supports practice is continuity. I mentioned staying with the breath from when you wake up to when you go to sleep. It's like that example of putting a pot of water on the stove. If we're constantly going to that pot and taking the top off to look in and see if it's boiling, we're going to slow the time it takes to heat and boil. In the same way, we need to maintain contact with the breath. Every time that we engage in conversation, inner and outer, anytime we read, anytime we engage with music or phone calls, anything like that, we're taking the lid off the pot of concentration. We're lessening the concentration. So there has to be that continuity of staying with the practice and not engaging in activities that's going to lessen our concentration. The way we can assist continuity is to pay attention to transitions. If we're meditating here, we take a break. As you're arising from your seat, that's a time your mind is going to shift to whatever's going to come next. Try and maintain some awareness on the breath. When I call for a break, really give some attention to maintaining awareness on the breath, then stand up from your seat. Then turn to walk. If you find you lose the breath, stop what you're doing, reconnect with the breath, and resume your activity. The third action that supports practice is silence. I mentioned inner and outer silence. One of the hindrance levels that we encounter when we're on a meditation retreat, the first is external noise and activity. We hear environmental noises. We hear people doing human things, coughing, sneezing, all of that. People coming in and out of the hall. Sometimes they're taking coats on and off. They're fiddling with their seats. So there can be noises going on. And the secret is to accept all of that, to not resist it, to not insist on having complete, perfect silence. It's learning to find the silence in the moment. A couple months ago, I was out at Harvard being tested for some brain testing on folks who had access to jhana and cessation. One of the activities was I was put in this super powerful MRI machine, the most powerful they have now, and asked to do the jhana practice for a couple hours. And the hardest part of it was finding silence. If you've been in an MRI, they make a lot of noise. It's not predictable noise, so it's randomized. And it took me a while, probably 15 or 30 minutes, to find the stillness in the noise. And that was sort of the most challenging aspect of that experiment I did with them. But you can do it. You can find the silence and maintain the contact. And a lot of it is not engaging in inner thought or dialogue or commentary. So it's just being with the breath, letting all of that happen, but letting it happen at a distance. If it's at a distance and you don't give it more energy, it'll get further and further away. So that's what we want to do. We can actually function without thought. When I was doing the 2-month retreat with the Sayadaw doing some of these practices, I was able to function without having a thought to do things. For example, I would feel bodily the need for water, and then I would see the concept, the idea, the thought, I need water would arise. And if I stayed paying attention to the energetic impulse, I called it, I could know what was needed without having to form a thought. It was very liberating, very, very relaxing to just function in this way. It's obviously much harder to do when we're back in the world, but it's a potential. So know that's a possibility. We also can cultivate silence early on the practice as we begin to pay attention to the gaps between thoughts. For most people, as they have thoughts, there's usually gaps of silence between thoughts. And one of the ways, if we're having trouble cultivating silence, is to pay attention to those gaps of silence. Make those what you're focusing on, and pull back on awareness when the thought's there, returning when that's a gap of silence, no thought. The fourth action is natural breathing. There are people that have learned various breathing techniques, particularly yogic practitioners, and so they'll sometimes bring those techniques into this practice. The people who give a lot of attention to their breath, manipulate their breath, and I'm not saying manipulate in a bad way, they're just directing it specifically. They normally have a little better beginning to their meditation. They seem to get concentrated a little more quickly, but it can't be sustained. So they drop deeper and then they plateau. They don't continue deepening because they're using a technique. And you have to let your system organically begin to settle with this practice and be led deeper and deeper. So a lot of it is letting the natural breathing happen. One of the problems with breath comes up as we get more settled, more concentrated. We can get to where our perception is that we're not breathing. We don't feel the body move, the lungs move, we don't feel breath. And our natural inclination, our survival instinct tells us, take a breath. And most of us do. We feel that sense of, I'm out of air, I'm getting in trouble. And again, the survival instinct kicks in and we gasp for breath. That's going to set us back on our concentration. We all end up doing it, but you learn after a while of each time that you're deep and you come back to the surface, I need to stay with this. And so we try to extend that period of time when we're perceiving no breath, but we're with the Anapana region. We just stay here. in the Anapana region. And we let the body perceive that there's no obvious breath. And that will continue to deepen the practice. I will say in 20 years, I've never had anybody pass out from lack of air. Nobody's had to go to the hospital. Everybody has stayed upright. So we all can do it. We have to learn to cultivate an acceptance of that, of the perception of little to no breath. The fifth practice is timing. And really, the main thing is when you're in the zone, when awareness is well established on the breath, when you can feel it deepening, stay with it. In those meditations, if you're practicing on retreat, extend that sitting. This is one reason why on a lot of my retreats, I do open sittings after a couple of days, where there's a guided meditation for the first hour, and then it's open for the rest of the morning or afternoon. This is so people can sit as they need to. Again, when you're in the zone, increase your time. If you're struggling, if you're having a hard time finding the breath, if you're having sinking mind, if you're, it's more of a struggle, you're tired, don't extend that sit. The positive psychology folks have established that when we put energy into things we're good at, we get much better. When we put energy into things we're not naturally good at, we get a little bit better. So our energy is better spent capitalizing when it's going well. So that applies to any meditation or retreat. Most people have a sense of how long they can meditate. I know that when I went into this retreat with the Sayadaw and began the jhana practice, he was saying, I want you to sit 2 hours with the breath. I was sitting an hour. And I thought, well, maybe I could do 2 hours. So I tried and found I could do 2 hours. And I came in to interview the next day, and he said, okay, I want you to do 3 hours. And I said, I can't do 3 hours. I'd never tried before, but I was quite convinced that I could not do it. And so he said, oh, try, and I did. And I found that I could do 3 hours. I mean, it took a lot of concentration. It's a lot of work to be able to sit that long, staying close to the breath. But it was possible when you're really in that seat. So you want to extend your time. At this point, when I teach jhana retreats, I generally don't recommend anyone go more than 2 hours unless they check with me. Because for a lot of people, I've learned it's a diminishing return. About 90 minutes to 2 hours to 120 minutes usually is a sweet spot for people. Some folks, after 90 minutes, the meditation begins to diminish. Not everybody can sit longer. I've had students who are very adept at this practice who could not sit longer than 90 minutes. So don't feel like you must sit hours in order to have a deep practice. If you're someone who can sit a couple of hours when you're in the zone, then that can be very helpful. If that's not you, then don't do this. You're going to exhaust yourself. So this is where we have to be realistic about our efforts and our ability. So the main thing is just be open to stretching yourself beyond what you think you can do. The next practice that assists is rigor. And rigor is a kind of vigilance. So it's first trying to maintain awareness on the breath from the moment we wake up to when we go to sleep. It's sitting longer when we're in the zone. One of the tips that I give people, I realized reflecting on the retreat I did, was I never let an hour go by without meditating. So if we had a meal and a break, say it was a 2-hour break, I would only take 1 hour and then I would meditate after that hour. If I was going to take a nap during the day, I would nap no longer than an hour so that I could sit. So that can be really, really helpful too. We also there are some practices that assist us staying with the breath. One of them is counting. The way counting works is we take an in-breath, an out-breath, and then we place a very soft number 1 as a placeholder on that slight gap between exhale and inhale. Surprisingly, people can get lost in that brief period of time. So using a number can be helpful. I was taught to count 1 through 8 and 8 to 1. We don't recommend counting in tens because it's easy for us to get lost. If it's a number that's unusual, like 1 to 8 and 8 to 1, we pay more attention. And then you can notice if all of a sudden you're at number 32, then clearly you've gotten distracted from your numbers. And also it's a way for you to see how well you do with concentration. If you can do 10 rounds of in and out breath without getting distracted at all, you know you're doing well. If you can go 1 breath and you're distracted, you know you need to sharpen your focus. You need to go a little deeper. So counting breaths is something if I was doing a retreat on this practice, I would start with counting breaths. Once the concentration developed, then I would drop the counting. It's only a support until you get deeper. The 7th action that supports is generosity. And this is really being kind and generous to your fellow yogis. It's not getting cross when people are making noises or asking questions that you don't find interesting. It's staying open, knowing that everybody is doing their best. Everybody is trying. So try to be kind when we're sitting together here, if you're on retreat in the hall together. Really try to maintain silence in your space. And just really try to extend kindness to each other on retreat. That helps a lot. And if people get into a story about other people, they talk about the Vipassana romances and Vipassana vendettas. So people on retreat can feel like they're falling in love with other yogis. They can also feel like they hate somebody else. And these are people they haven't met, they haven't talked to. So this is part of our possibility. We call it yogi mind, where our mind goes to places that aren't actually happening. It's more of a fantasy. And the final action that supports practice is to include your heart. I encourage people to start with innate goodness, get that juiciness present. We want to keep our inspirations, our love of meditation, our joy of practice, our devotion. We want to keep these alive as part of our practice. This helps the juiciness. Let me pause here and see if there's any questions or clarifications might be helpful. If you're in the zone and say you've allotted 30 minutes and you have more time in your day, then try to extend it to 40 or 45 minutes. If you're comfortable with 45 minutes and you're in the zone, try to go to 60 minutes. So just you do a little 10-minute, 15-minute. If that proves to be too much, then try doing 5 minutes more. You want to just increase a little bit because it stretches us. I tell people you want to be slightly uncomfortable at the end. So you want to push a little bit where it's a little bit of a challenge to stay with it, but it's not really, really hard or it's not impossible. And that builds that muscle of concentration by extending ourselves in that way. So give that a try. You'll obviously get more concentrated. Every time we come back to the breath when we've been distracted, there's a percentage or a quality of purification of mind. So we're cultivating the purification of mind. Again, every time we come back, you're deepening the meditation, you're preferencing the breath over whatever else was distracting you. So this is all good, and it just builds from there. So don't worry a lot. Just keep coming back. Try to come back softly.